Welcome to Window Dressing. I'm Madeline Jane Albel. This week, I revisit my first season with an episode about Sharon Tate. I thought it would be an apt first foray into a full videocast. Sharon's iconography begins with her beauty queen teenage years in Texas and ends in her Beverly Hills Benedict Canyon home in August of 1969. She was only 26 years old. I am not going to get into the details of her murder, but I will discuss how it affected her image and what the press did to her and, by extension, female victims of crime more generally. She is a very important figure to me personally. I consider her somewhat of a patron saint of wounded women, and my aim is to grant her the reverence she and her impact on culture deserve. Sharon grew up in Texas and, as I mentioned, was a literal beauty queen. Later, she moved to LA and began a career in modeling, which led to acting, and then she landed a 7-year contract at MGM, one of the last studio system Star Trek agreements around. She was groomed for the big time with small-time roles in Mr. Ed and other television shows of the time. She eventually won a role in the 1966 film Don't Make Waves, which was the impetus for Malibu Barbie. Her character's name was Malibu, a beautiful but near-mute surfer who is upset that her beefcake boy toy of a boyfriend won't have sex with her. This kind of film is a good example of how Hollywood was not only behind the culture in the 1960s, but also made a joke of it. Regardless, Sharon's image is indelible and lends the movie a touch of her light. While Americans were making surfing romps and Elvis films, French director Roger Vadim was creating a harem of sex goddesses that eventually pulled talent from the United States. Catherine Deneuve, Brigitte Bardot, and our own Jane Fonda were all either wives or girlfriends of this notorious Svengali director. Tate was America's version of a Vadim sex goddess, or at least that's how she was billed, sold, and eventually buried. The thing about Sharon was that she wasn't actually a sex goddess. There were no films that backed up that label. She was sort of that in her husband Roman Polanski's film The Fearless Vampire Killers, but not in the same way that Deneuve or Bordeaux was. Her role in Don't Make Waves is definitely of an objectified woman, but that doesn't necessarily equal sex goddess. What Sharon was, more than sexy, was beautiful. The distinction is not easily measured, except to say that sexiness, especially in the 1960s, was very much about men and what they desired, whereas beauty is a power source that isn't defined by anything outside of the woman who possesses it. If you attempt to break down what makes Sharon breathtaking, you end up with an incomplete answer. Her beauty was beyond compare. Whitewashing her character, her person, and her life after and in large part because of her murder is disgusting. It's an additional theft of her power. The grave robbery in the press feels very similar to Marilyn Monroe, an industry-sponsored erasure of someone's humanity in service of a profitable circus show, or more accurately described, a complete takeover of the power both women possessed in life by the very culture that created the circumstances of their death. Sharon Tate handed her killer the weapon was the headline for an October 1969 photoplay article written by Tony Hardwick. The thesis of the piece is that Sharon was asking for it because of her beauty, talent, husband, lover, and the list goes on and on. Pre-discovery of the Manson family, Sharon was vilified. Post-discovery, she was transformed from a woman to a forever victim. She was known, but was not yet a big star in her own right at the time of her death. People mostly referred to her as the wife of Roman Polanski. The thing said of Sharon that touches closest to the truth came from a friend of the family and my favorite cowboy. Yul Brynner said, Sharon had a fragile, incandescent quality that brought oxygen into the room. It is apt that the oxygen of an era disappeared with her death. Sharon was a victim of the time she lived in. The sexual revolution allowed her husband the freedom to fuck around on her while she was expected to look the other way, all while fetching him a drink. A hallmark of the so-called sexual liberation was that women became communal property instead of the property of just one man. While on the set of The Fearless Vampire Killers, where Roman and Sharon met, Roman photographed Sharon nude for Playboy, a kind of condoned pimping of his well-earned prize. The connection to Playboy is interesting, but it's nearly unavoidable in the 1960s as a celebrity. Playboy not only reflected the culture of the time, but was very much wrapped up in creating it. The sexual revolution spawned the man in the red robe and his harem, just like it helped create Manson and his harem of man-pleasing killers. I am not trying to disparage the girls that they used to be or the women that they would become, just the pawns and the playthings Manson made of them. Hefner seems like a better sort than Manson, but minus the murders, he may just be the more successful one. I have tried in vain to watch and write about her in this film, but I find it so repulsive, I can't make it much past the first beat. It is littered with phallic imagery, grotesque old men spanking and doing other rapey things to beautiful young girls. This era of film is truly the precursor to incest porn, which is the second most popular porn search among men. Just a reminder of the devastating reality of what lies in the hearts and minds of men, as if her Playboy spread, peddled by her boyfriend, wasn't proof enough of that reality for Sharon. Her exploitation continued after her death. She was blamed, vilified, and exploited by nearly every single publication. She was a witch, a whore, and ultimately, if not directly responsible for what happened to her, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Wierkowski, Stephen Parent, and her own unborn child, at the very least, she was asking for it. By the time the satanic panic passed in the 1980s of my childhood, Sharon's image had shifted in the press from witchy whore to virginal angel. There has never been room for just her, as she was. This is true for women and doubly true for beautiful women. You are not allowed to be anything but what men want from you or want to blame on you. When I was a little girl, I didn't know the details of exploitation and theft around a woman's power source. I just knew I loved Sharon Tate. I don't know if I was able to understand what had happened to her, but I must have seen something about her on television because I was very much aware of her at a young age. Now I think she is emblematic of the type of violence, emotional, physical, and psychic, that women experience throughout the course of their lives. But then I thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I rewatched The Valley of the Dolls ad infinitum throughout my life, just for a glimpse of her. And now I buy her yellow roses every week, which were her favorite flowers. The film adaptation of The Valley of the Dolls is based on Jacqueline Suzanne's best-selling book of the same title, published in 1966. William Travilla was the costume designer responsible for the film's enduring legacy. Travilla costumed Marilyn Monroe in The 7-Year Itch and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Ben Nye did the makeup. Raphael Breton and Walter M. Scott were the set decorators. The iconic opening song sung by Dionne Warwick was written by Dory Previn and arranged by Andre Previn, her husband. I am going to do a full breakdown of the film. It is a long, sort of winding movie, but I think the backdrop and the characters that aren't Sharon are important to understanding what her role was and how small it was in comparison to her co-stars. Ann Wells, played by Barbara Parkins, narrates throughout in an ode to soaps that is delightfully well-suited to the material. Anne is a small-town girl from an upper-crust New England family who travels to New York City to find herself. Upon her arrival, she checks into the Martha Washington Hotel for Girls. Until 1965, it was illegal in the city of New York for a single woman to check into anything other than an all-girls hotel without a man at her side, preferably one in an ownership role, like a husband or father. This story took place at the very end of that norm. Anne begins work as an entertainment lawyer's secretary and is eventually scouted as the new face of a cosmetic company. In the intervening months, she meets and falls in love with her boss's partner, Lyon Burke. Lyon leaves her flat to go find himself in Europe, and she moves on with said modeling career. Neely, a young up-and-coming singer played by Patty Duke, is in a play headlined by Helen Lawson, played by Susan Hayward. Lawson is a client of Anne's boss. Neely gets booted from the play and ends up opening for a young singer and general hunk, Tony Pollard, played by Tony Scott. Tony and Jennifer, Sharon Tate's character, meet and fall in love instantly, but are forced to see each other in secret because Tony's stage mother of a sister doesn't want him to marry. It is later divulged that Tony has Huntington's disease. This is Tony's sister's reason for not wanting her brother to marry. Tony and Jennifer do get married, and eventually the illness strikes Tony down and leaves a newly pregnant Jennifer without enough money and a fear of passing said disease along to her child. Jennifer is forced to work in French art movies, aka porn, to make ends meet. Meanwhile, Neely has risen to fame and is now faced with a grueling schedule, which she accommodates with dolls, a euphemism for pills, mostly the red ones, which are dexedrine, that's speed, but some other candy colors are in the mix as well. Lyon Burke returns from London and starts working as Neely's agent. Lyon and Anne reunite and live together in an oceanside Malibu estate. Neely ends up on a bender that lands her in a sanatorium on the insistence of Anne and Lyon. Tony is staying at the same sanatorium as Neely. Small town. Jennifer, after a stint in France with an exploitive director named Claude, comes home to find out she has breast cancer. Faced with the reality of a mastectomy, disfiguring her body and no way to support herself or her husband, she commits suicide. Neely, with the support of her friends, recovers and sets her sights on Lyon. She succeeds, but ends up alone and back on the dolls when Lyon walks out on her. He chases down Anne, who, after her own suicide attempt, went back to her precious New England town. Anne refuses Lyon's hand in marriage and ends up becoming whole again in her upper crust hometown. So, obviously, Anne is obnoxious. She is a stuffy New England beauty granted protection by her money and family, which Tate's character, Jennifer, doesn't have. Jennifer's beauty is superior, her talent equal, but she ends up making porn in France because she isn't a brunette from old money. I really struggle with Anne. She drives me crazy. There is one scene where she makes Lyon go to some Harvard or Yale-type bar with a hearth fireplace and likely a ritual rape once a week. Jennifer is relatable and lovable, but made quite invisible by her beauty and the torture porn price she is made to pay for it. In Tate's first scene, her character Jennifer comes down the stairs of a dingy rehearsal space surrounded by less dazzling performers in leotards and tights. She wears a black leotard, kitten-heeled black pumps, and a magnificent headdress of jewel-encrusted platinum and bright blue ostrich feathers. The side pieces of her headdress dangle down over her ears like earrings. The feathers plume out of the top and drape generously down her shoulders and back. She has to walk with her arms outstretched to maintain balance as she descends her last step. The group jeers and laughs at her. The director covers his face with his hands so that all he can see is her body. He says, $600 for a headdress and no one will even see it. This is a rather garishly drawn depiction of a woman only valued for her body. It is hard to believe about Jennifer because beauty and body are not the same thing. The kind of beauty that Jennifer inhabits is in her face. It's in her eyes. It's in her hair. Even with an extravagantly gorgeous headdress, covering her hair is a mistake. You can't see Sharon Tate, and by extension, Jennifer, without seeing her hair. When Tate was getting started, her agent would put her in small parts wearing a dark wig to give her experience in front of the camera while keeping her under wraps. This is what this scene does. It hides her. Next time we see Jennifer, she enters a red-walled Playboy-esque club where Neely, Mel, Anne, and Lion are all celebrating. She walks in with a halo of dazzling blonde hair, snow-white beaded gown. The V-necked sleeveless dress has alternating diagonal stripes of fringed beads that accentuate her movement when she walks. The alternating flat beaded stripes create a pool for the light to live in while she stands still. Her hair is half up at the crown, where it is secured amongst a pile of teased volume. The rest of her golden blonde hair drapes over her shoulders and back. Her baby hairs are curled around where her ear meets her jawbone in an Elvis-inspired nod to excellent bone structure. Her eye makeup is her signature, and one does wonder if she dictated to the makeup artist or did it herself. She lines the creases of her eyes like Garbo and layers on the mascara thick at her bottom and top lashes like Twiggy. Her lips are lined with the same brown pencil accentuating her lid crease and adorned with clear gloss, or something very near to nude. Her cheeks glow warmly with bronzer that highlights her cheekbones. She is an absolute vision. As Jennifer walks into the club past Neely and her group, Neely says, "Oh, look, there goes Jennifer with one of her rich boyfriends. I bet 100 beads pop off every time she moves." Anne says, "She is lovely." Less garish, but still missing the point, Anne. Jennifer sits with her much older date at the table that borders the stage floor. Tony Pillar, lounge singer and all-around handsome young man, comes out and sets his sights on Jennifer as he belts out a ballad called "Come Live With Me." Taken by Tony, but still trying to maintain composure for the sake of her date, Jennifer falls for him right there. This young man has to sing for his supper like she must keep company to eat. There is more between them than the beauty they both possess. The way that Neely talks about Jennifer in this scene, like she is a fucking circus animal and a lucky one to boot, is disgusting. Jennifer is constantly demeaned, but to suffer such slings and arrows from a fellow woman and friend is awful. In Neely's eyes, she has talent, which takes work to hone and deserves respect, whereas Jennifer just has looks. This somehow doesn't matter or doesn't require special effort. The general malice and unreasonable expectations put on Jennifer are in line with what Tate likely experienced in life. A pretty girl's curse that isn't as inconsequential as one might assume, which we have clearly established through the photoplay article printed after Sharon Tate's death, in which she was directly blamed for her own murder because of her beauty. Neely is working for the patriarchy in this particular scene, and honestly, maybe all of them. Later in the film, Jennifer is sitting in a dingy screening room in France with her predatory director, Claude. She smokes a cigarette in the dark room. Her hair is parted in the middle and pulled back into a chignon at the nape of her neck. Her legs are crossed, and she wears a look of accomplishment mixed with discomfort on her face. She looks businesslike in her high-neck, peacock-printed mini dress and mustard yellow single-breasted suede jacket. There is none of the typical height and tease to her pulled-back hair, just the two curls at her cheekbones and the signature Garbo eye. She looks chic, as an indication of age and experience. Unfortunately, experience is often gained through exploitation and rape. Art film sex scenes roll across the screen in front of them. Jennifer's naked body is only covered by odd angles, fabric, or a man's body. The film ends with a still shot of the Eiffel Tower as Jennifer stares out into the night. As the lights go up, Jennifer turns to her director, Claude, and says, "Well, this is by far the best we've made." Claude responds by telling her there is an offer to buy her contract and distribute the films in the United States. She says, "Does that mean I can go home?" Claude hems and haws, enjoying the power he has over her. She says, I've hated this. You'll find another girl. Tate's delivery of this line of dialogue is one of the most potently believable moments in the whole film. Claude still doesn't agree to sell Jennifer's contract. He says, "Yes, I will. A younger girl, a real actress." The look on Jennifer's face is one of shame and heartbreak. He makes her negotiate down to 1/3 of the profits when she is entitled to half. She accepts and says, "Fine, I will do anything, just let me go home." Claude jumps on the word anything and says that they will talk about it later at the apartment. A close-up shot of Jennifer's face following Claude's comment reveals her fear and disgust at what lies ahead of her. Jennifer's public exploitation jumps to private and personal the moment it becomes clear that she is made to share an apartment with Claude. The look on her face after he suggests a private negotiation indicates an ongoing rape as part of the deal situation between the two. All of her hard-earned professional airs disappear in that moment. He intentionally strips her of the dignity of being a paid professional. He makes her into a sexually exploited piece of property that is quite literally bought and sold through, for, and with sex. In other words, she performs and he cashes in, physically and materially. It is a bit like the circus animal act Neely treated her as. One of the harshest moments in the scene is when Claude makes it clear that he can find a younger version of her, one that is a quote-unquote real actress, meaning one with talent whose beauty doesn't have a rapidly approaching expiration date. The brutality of that statement's effect is visible on Jennifer's face from this point on. It is also a poignant depiction of how it feels to be told, "You're just pretty," but also, "Not for long." Men do everything in their power to dethrone women, to pull them down, and then we are supposed to see this easy access groping point as equality. That is, unless, of course, you were born in New England and come from money. In Jennifer's last scene, she discovers that she has breast cancer and needs to undergo a mastectomy. Jennifer sits up in bed, explaining to Anne that her lump is malignant. Anne sits at the literal edge of her seat, wearing a white dress that makes her look suspiciously like a nurse. Jennifer looks glorious, wearing a short yellow cotton bedcoat with embroidered flowers at the bust, Peter Pan collar, and white lace trim. Her hair is pulled up halfway and secured with a black ribbon at her crown. Her eyes are graciously lined as usual, only this time they have tears in them. The room is decorated in green and orange with a strange oblong headboard that resembles a pill behind Jennifer's head. Jennifer says, "You know, it's funny. All I ever had was a body, and now I won't even have that." Anne responds,
"Jen, stop talking like that."
Jennifer says, "How am I going to keep Tony in the sanatorium?" Anne's response is that her agent boyfriend who cheats on her will get Jennifer a job. Jennifer says, "Anne, honey, let's face it. All I know how to do is to take off my clothes." This scene makes it clear that Jennifer feels that all she has is her beauty, and without it, she has literally nothing. None of her friends offered to help her financially when she needed it. No one listened when she so clearly was in pain. They let her suffer because they look past her as a result of her beauty. Jennifer gets up to look at herself in the mirror. She pulls out a pill bottle and takes a handful of red dolls. After swallowing the pills, she removes her bedcoat, revealing a biopsy bandage on her left breast and a long, brown, sheer-layered organza-esque slip with white lace at the bust and delicate straps. She returns to the bed and lays down with large tears in her eyes. The color of her organza slip matches the darker parts of her hair, creating a soft focus effect on her face. Her lips are shiny and her cheeks look dewy as she waits for the pills to kill her. She cries to the sound of a remembered song her institutionalized husband used to sing to her. The interesting thing about the slip in this scene is its color. It's brownish taupe, And it's very beautiful, but also very reminiscent of the 1940s. This was likely not a conscious choice, but for me, it makes her read on screen as an icon, especially in a death scene. The obvious choice would have been to put her in white or cream, or even a delicately childlike color like pink or blue. But choosing this earthy, alive shade of brown is sort of wild. And if you don't know much about 1940s slips or have an awareness of color trends of the 1930s and 1940s, you wouldn't know it is a throwback color. But that is the entirety of the reason it reads like old Hollywood glamour. The design of the slip itself is very modern. I'm wearing a slip from the 40s. She was clearly wearing a slip from the 60s. Sharon, as a woman, represented the moment between classic Hollywood glamour and modernity in the movies. Her image stands as the height of beauty. Yet, there is a childlike innocence, a wonder that doesn't match Fonda or other women who embodied the 1970s star. It's that innocence that makes her such an easy target after death. We can make her be whatever we want, even during her life. The pliability that was required of her in her career and her personal life made her easily transformed to suit the leading narrative. The biggest issue I take with that is not that it happened, which I am angry about, but that she is still dismissed as not being of value except as a murder victim. How the fuck would anybody know what her value was when the entire culture was busy devaluing her during her life and after her death? Regardless of the semantics of beauty and its place in the world of men, she was valuable to me. The lost innocence and confusion that seemed to dominate the last year of her life, along with what I witnessed happened after her death, or rather what I heard about her as a child nearly 15 years after her death, would later prove to be very important information. I promised I wouldn't talk about the details of the crime, and I won't. But I am going to talk about the impact of what happened to her. I am not speaking about all Manson family victims here, just Sharon. She became the ultimate scapegoat initially. And even now, when she is for the most part seen as a true victim, that has become her entire memory. She either possessed all of the agency or none of the agency. The way Roman spoke about her after the murders was like he was talking about a small child. There was one press conference specifically where he said, "You didn't know how good she was." And I'm paraphrasing now, but he essentially said she didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she was perfect. As an aside, she did smoke. The perfect victim started with that interview. And who could blame him, at least for that? The thing we don't talk about when speaking about the tragic loss of Sharon Tate is how it affected the landscape for female victims in America. I think witnessing this case play out in the press for decades had a huge impact on young girls. I know for me, her murder gave me some understanding about what a good versus bad victim was and how little control you would have over that. It also instilled a sense of shame and heavy responsibility around my appearance. What did I do to bring this on? What about me made this happen? Those are all questions I and other female victims of crime ask themselves or have literally been asked by others over and over again. I am not suggesting that victim blaming began with the Tate murders. But as the most notorious crime in Los Angeles history, I think it had an outsized effect on the awareness and understanding of what that looked like. And without being too over the top, I do think Sharon Tate has become a patron saint of wounded women. Another way Sharon's murder affected the American landscape that I should make note of is the parole process. Sharon's mother, Doris Tate, spent years petitioning for victims' rights laws that would allow family members into parole hearings. Over many decades, they have managed to change the process for parole in California. Victims' statements are now part of the sentencing process. This is a significant change, and not always one I agree with. I do think there are advantages to the work Doris Tate has done. It paved the way for the 1990s stalking laws in California. We were the first state to enact such laws. Giving victims a voice is a good thing, but keeping someone in prison too long is not. I am thinking of Leslie Van Houten, one of the Manson girls present at the La Bianca murders. She has done amazing work with her fellow female prisoners and has truly become a whole woman. The continual denial of her freedom was in large part because of the surviving family members of all the victims, but specifically Deborah Tate. This is largely a political decision. The optics dictate the action, or in this case, the inaction that leads to the potential loss of another woman's life, this time behind bars. When I initially wrote and aired this episode, Leslie was still in prison. She has since been released. The tide seems to be turning on the nature of coercive control and how long you can punish women for a man's crime. To end, I want to talk about a still image of Sharon, one on her wedding day, where she is wearing the infamous taffeta mini wedding dress. I want to talk about her on that day, the dress, her hair, and her makeup, because I think every styling choice reflects the fairy tale spirit she possessed. A wedding most certainly represents that in our culture, and regardless of her husband, she embodied a mythic princess on this day. The dress was made of a creamy silk taffeta, which is a thick and very sculptural fabric. The shoulders poofed and then tapered into a long mutton sleeve, with delicate buttoning around the cuffs. The neck is high in an Edwardian revival way that was all the rage at the time. Think of brands like Young Edwardian. The neck has 2 rows of mini pom-pom piping. The waistline is empire, which is right under the bust and is marked with the same pom-pom piping. The heavy fabric itself gleams with the mark of fine taffeta. Taffeta has a kind of patterned texture that looks like the timeline of a tree's life. The whole thing feels like a fantastic storybook princess living in a wooded garden. Her hair is pulled back and done up in a large and long poof of smoothed curls with woven-in daisies of pink and white. There are also ribbons tied into her hair. This is an important detail because it is reminiscent of the style of bouquet from the 1920s called spray bouquets, which were ultra-romantic and had flower buds that hung down from ribbons. This, along with the Edwardian-era dress, adds to the storybook aesthetic. Her face looks slim and frail with her hair pulled back. She has her eyes done as usual in the Greta Garbo style, but with a glossier lid. Her lips are more naturally coral pink in a sort of flushed way. Unfortunately, her wedding dress was sold at auction in 2018 at LA-based auction house Julian's. The dress fetched $52,250. This is a common occurrence, the public sale of personal memorabilia, especially in Hollywood. I personally think there should be a public preservation house in Los Angeles for exactly this kind of thing. Some private estates do a great job of preservation. Elvis and Sinatra's come to mind. But the most important pieces of American history and film history often end up in private collection. Sharon's dress is now in a haunted object museum in Vegas. So that's not great. Sharon Tate was a glorious woman who doesn't get the proper respect I think her and her image demand. Her role in culture is undeniably important to other female victims and American culture, period. Thank you for listening and watching Window Dressing Podcast. I will be back soon with a long-awaited Jessica Simpson episode. Please like and subscribe wherever you are listening and follow me on Instagram at Window Dressing Podcast for more content. I'm Madeline Jane Auble.